with responsibilities for nature's growing cycles and needs of livestock, I learned the lessons of accountability and responsibilities at an early age. I was very lucky. My dad took me with him to the fields at an early age. He built small seats on each of the horse-drawn farm implements so I could sit there and witness at first hand the process of preparing the soil, seeding, mowing, and harvesting. My first chore was to fill the wood box for our cook stove and heating stove. We did not have indoor plumbing until 1940. I learned to drive our draft horses team, and at 12 years of age, I began to drive our tractor. I liked machinery and did not care too much for the drudgery of caring for livestock, which were a periodic demand on time every morning and evening, milking the cows and feeding them and making certain that they were healthy. My parents were well read, and they encouraged my curiosity and reading habits. One of my treasured possessions was a set of Compton's pictured encyclopedias, which I had pored over when I had free time. I was also entranced by Richard Halliburton's travel adventure books, The Occident and the Orient. National Geographic was my magic carpet in learning about other lands. I attended a city elementary school till the third grade when we moved to another farm, where I then enrolled in a township grade school until the 8th grade. We had a principal who was a hard-shell Baptist and required us to recite Bible verses every morning after a short dissertation that he gave. There was a Catholic family in our neighborhood who were the only non-Protestants in this all-white school, and the father of the family asked the principal to excuse his children from the Baptist Bible lessons, and he refused. So he went to the school board, of which my father was a member, and the school board supported the Catholic family, and so that was kind of my first experience with different beliefs and how they play out in the real world. I graduated from Sydney High School in 1948. I was active in a lot of school activities, band, orchestra, played oboe and clarinet. I sang in the Boys Glee Club, and then I was a member of the Science Club. One of my fellow classmates is Paul Lauterbur, who went on to win the Nobel Prize for MRI imaging technology. And Paul was in the Science Club also, and we had the great idea of when we were allowed to use the chem lab instead of our study hall to pursue our own individual projects. We were studying white phosphorus at the time, and which has to be immersed in a kerosene bath to avoid spontaneous combustion. Paul had the great idea on that one fine spring day, and I have to point out that in those days the high school buildings were built so you could actually open the windows, and we had the windows open and breathing in the nice spring air, and he'd soak the little paper airplanes in this white phosphorus alcohol bath and then sail them out the window, and then they'd burst into flame. Well, that went on, a great merriment among our team, until one of the little paper airplanes did a 180, came down to the second floor, through the open window, landed on the principal's desk. Talk about Stormy Daniels, this was Stormy Lowe. He came up in a high dudgeon and was all set to suspend all of us and expel us from school and levy other punishments on. And mercifully, our science teacher was a very level-headed guy, and he said, look, nobody's hurt. These guys are creative, and he's settling down, but he promised that we'd no longer have unsupervised activities. and I often wondered, if he had succeeded in suspending us if Paul Lauterber's career might have been interrupted and he would not have gone on to invent the MRI. So those are life's little on and off switches that take place. After high school, I went to Case Institute of Technology in Cleveland to study mechanical engineering, and that was my first experience out of an all-white community, essentially, to see Cleveland, the great melting pot of ethnic groups, and right next door to our campus was the African American community, which is pretty much a ghetto type of area, and then on the other side were the Italians and the Eastern Europeans, and the makeup of the student body at Case was international, people from all over the world, so it was quite an eye-opening experience for me. After I graduated from Case, I had an elective course in my senior year on rocket engineering, which was the first time they had offered that, and so I took that. And then I was hired at NACA, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which is the predecessor of NASA, at their Lewis lab in Cleveland Airport, and worked in the rocket laboratory there, one of 30-some engineers throughout the whole organization that was working on liquid rocket propulsion. I worked at that for a couple of years and did all sorts of experiments with rocket performance. And you know, the old saying is, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to, but I am one. I recognized that I had this military draft obligation hanging over me when I've been getting deferments for essential work at NASA or NACA. But I decided I wanted to get that taken care of, so I joined the Air Force as an aviation cadet. I learned to fly and got my commission and was assigned to Strategic Air Command as an RB-47 bomber, reconnaissance bomber pilot. I flew there for about a year and a half when, and then we had some interesting experiences there, like deploying up to Thule, Greenland, and then flying electronic intelligence gathering missions along the northern border of the Soviet Union, and probing the Russian defenses, and they would always scramble MiG fighters to come after us, but our reconnaissance bombers were about 25 knots faster than the MiG. So after I was there for a while, I had known Colonel John Stapp from my rocket days at Lewis, and he contacted me and said, "I heard you were in SAC. Wouldn't you rather come to Holloman and use your engineering background? I have some projects I want you to work on a long 7-mile track." So I transferred out to Holloman in New Mexico at Alamogordo, and we did human and animal acceleration tolerance tests on the track, and a lot of ordnance testing for seeing how ordnance fusing would behave under heavy impact loads. I finished up there, and on the way back to, I was on military furlough from NACA, and so on my way back to Cleveland after my military service, I stopped in Wichita. I had met a Cessna representative about a year before, and so I delivered a Cessna 180 to Costa Rica, which was quite a nice adventure, and I could spend the whole evening spinning yarns about that. But I went back to Cleveland, and then about the time I got back, Neil Armstrong, who was a neighboring county friend of mine, was leaving Cleveland to transfer out to Edwards Air Force Base to fly more exotic aircraft. And so the slot was open, so I, with my flight background, I was able to move into flying as a research test pilot at Lewis, where I worked on a number of projects, including monitoring the Soviet H-bomb test fallout along the U.S.-Canadian border. And my big project was zero gravity flying. We a modified airplane, and I flew over 750 trajectories, which gave me more time and weightlessness than John Glenn did on his initial flight. The other exciting part of that was working with the Mercury 7 astronauts, John Glenn and Gordon Cooper and all the rest of them, in providing support on the testing of their skills and so on. We had several facilities at Lewis that they had to perform on, and I and a couple of other pilots were the guinea pigs in getting those test programs established. I moved to Washington in 1962, but first of all, I go back a little bit. I had a social life besides my technical interests, and I was a member of the Lakewood Presbyterian Co-eds, which was a young singles group in western Cleveland. I met this charming young, pretty elementary school teacher, and Sue and I courted, and it led to, one thing led to another, and we were married in 1960. Well, my friend in Costa Rica, to whom I delivered the airplane a couple of years before, wrote to me, he says, "Costa Rica is a wonderful place for a honeymoon. I have another airplane to have delivered." So Sue and I delivered the first Cessna 210 retractable gear airplane south of the border, and again, I have a whole evening worth of stories to tell about that. But, one of which was, as we left Wichita, there was a big, heavy weather front coming through, and we had to get off the ground fast. And I had Sue read the checklist to me as we roared down the runway. That was the preparation we had for that. Then I moved to headquarters in 1962, NASA headquarters. Worked briefly for the Space Task Group and launch vehicle engineering to look at the heavy lift rockets that eventually became the Apollo Saturn rocket. And then an opening at the administrator's office for a technical assistant. The administrator came up, and I spent the next 18 months as a technical gopher for Jim Webb and Dr. Hugh Dryden, which was a real game changer for me in terms of understanding how the agency worked and seeing all of the different personalities of very smart people and how they fought each other for priorities and that sort of thing. So it was a great experience in seeing human behavior at work. I forgot to mention that while I was at Lewis in flight there, Fred Hayes had just graduated from Oklahoma State University and came to work for us in flight ops. And Fred and I formed a very close friendship. I had to mentor him and check him out in all the aircraft in our fleet there. And then he went on to become an astronaut in Apollo 13 fame. Fred was my backup pilot on the zero-G flights. The biggest, most important and satisfying program I think I managed while I was at NASA headquarters in the Aeronautics Division was the fire research, fire-worthy materials research program. It was stimulated by the crash of the Varig 707 outside of Paris, where everybody on the airplane died before the airplane crash landed into an orchard east of Paris. And they died from an onboard fire and the fumes that the combustibles produced. So we had a good chemical projects lab out in NASA Ames, and we put together a program to design new materials for cabin interiors, working with Boeing and Lockheed and Douglas at the time, as well as FAA. The result of all that has been a marked improvement in fire resistance for people who are flying in aircraft these days, all of that transferred into real use. I spent a couple of years as a NASA liaison to the National Aeronautics and Space Council staff under astronaut Bill Anders and the Vice President Spiro Agnew. And I also spent a year as Special Assistant to FAA Administrator for Aviation Safety. I became a trustee of Bowen College of Aeronautics and Technology in Queens, New York from 1980 until this year when I was elected trustee emeritus. I retired from NASA in '79, and then I did some consulting work with the National Academy of Engineering Space Shuttle Processing Contract and the Office of Technology Assessment in Congress before joining Flight Safety Foundation in 1980 as president, where I served for about 13 years. It was an international nonprofit organization supported by airlines, unions, governments, manufacturers, insurance, academia, etc., in over 150 countries that fostered safety improvements in civil aviation. It was unique in influencing improvement in safety, and we were, at the time, were the only information exchange group. We were successful in bringing in the Soviet Union and China into our membership as they were beginning to expand into flying internationally. And I worked closely with the new Russian reformists to create a similar safety organization in Moscow. And we initiated contacts between Flight Safety Foundation, Russia, and China as they gradually abandoned their restrictive policies. I made several trips quite a number of trips to Russia, and did an extensive number of lectures on safe practices for their various groups. I was also participated as a member of a team to examine safety issues with the refurbishment of the space shuttle after each flight. After each flight, the shuttle had to go into about a 12-month processing procedure to re-tile it where the tile was burned off, and repair any other things that broke on the first flight. I served as a member of the United Kingdom Civil Aviation Authority's airport capacity study, and a member of the Dutch study of the Schiphol airport expansion. Sue was able to travel with me on many of my visits to member organizations around the world, giving us both new understandings of different customs, cultures, history, and so on. And we retained many, many good friends from that stage of our lives all over the world. I retired from Flight Safety Foundation in 1994 and formed my own consultant group to conduct safety assessments for international airlines and government aviation authorities. We were active in the next 10 years with clients in Greece, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. In all these endeavors, I was influenced by the interaction between individual researchers, managers, executives, and politicians as they confronted the application of technical achievements to real world problems in aviation. I testified before Congress a number of times on safety matters. Out of all of that, which was certainly not totally exhaustive, was I learned that nobody has a corner on knowledge or innovation. Cooperation and sharing of knowledge, techniques, and practices is the best way to advance. Protectionism is a sure way to lose out in the long term. Better to run faster than the competition. And adoption and acceptance of international standards for safe operating practices is essential for a robust industry, whether it's aviation or manufacturing industry. So that was kind of a quick run through of my, not so quick, I apologize.
No, please, no apologies. That's fascinating, and I'm constantly reminded about how much wealth and knowledge and experience we have in this church, and especially for our youth growing up. I mean, they would go out and pay money to listen to someone speak about what Jack has been through. So again, I think we're just so blessed to have people in the church who have this wealth of knowledge, and I think it's important to somehow bring it to our children who would be fascinated that you're a rocket scientist. It's amazing. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions just about that. So you've mentioned about the Baptists and the Catholic and just realizing the differences in belief system. Would you mind sharing more about your faith journey with us, please?
Sure. Yeah, right. I grew up in the Methodist Episcopal Church in Sydney, Ohio, and our family were regular in attendance. And my parents set the example of service in the work of the church. I was active in our local and district MYF and a member of the choir. My college years saw me less regular in attendance, but I loved the Epworth Euclid Methodist Church in University Circle in Cleveland. It was my first experience in a large church with powerful ministers and glorious music. After graduation, I did my 40 days of wandering in the wilderness, typical of that age group. But I joined the Lakewood, Ohio Presbyterian Co-eds and Ecumenical Social Group. We had about 250 members on the mailing list, and we got about 70 or 80 out every Sunday night for a meeting of a brief ecumenical service and an interesting talk by somebody talking on current topics, and then we had refreshments and dancing until 10 o'clock at night. So we had 2 Fridays a month in social activities outside the church, and so we figured, we're giving you Sunday night and these social things. If you don't have a date for the other 2 Saturdays, why you haven't worked hard enough. When Sue and I moved to Bethesda in 1962, we joined the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church because several of our Cleveland friends had belonged there. And that was Lincoln's church, and the preacher was George Dougherty at the time, and he was very active in the Selma marches. He was a very strong proponent of racial harmony and so on. I sang in a couple of musical productions there, and both of us were active in the young adults group. When our children, Elizabeth, who's here with us today, and Ellen were born and they reached school age, we transferred to North Bethesda, and we're very active here ever since, holding just about every committee assignment at one time or another over the years. We both sang in the choir for many years, and during the 70s and 80s, Charlie Belt and I did all the lawn mowing. Carol Getzinger twisted my arm to enroll in Disciples 1 class. Until then, I always held my religious beliefs very closely and seldom was comfortable discussing it with others. The class was a turning point, and it became easier to talk about strengths and weaknesses of faith with others. And for that, I'm forever grateful to Carol and my fellow classmates. So,
thank you, Jack. It always warms my heart when we hear names of people who have passed but are so beloved to this church and the impact they've had on our our lives and our church members. So I was going to twist your arm to join the choir, but you clearly did that for many years. And you also mentioned you played some instruments growing up. What other talents or hobbies or skills do you have?
Well, I was a jack of all trades and master of none. Throughout my life, I've had far more interest and time to pursue them. I love to read. I favor history, all eras, archaeology, science, international thrillers, spy stories, newspapers and magazines. My TV viewing habits favor BBC News and programming, political discussions. Classical music, choral music, and Broadway musicals are among my favorites, and I have to confess I'm not terribly fond of contemporary country music. But I love ragtime, Dixieland jazz, and most banjo, mandolin, and classic guitar music. As I said, I used to play clarinet, oboe, and then I also played recorder and classical guitar. And at one time I was an avid photographer and a photo processor. I also ran a short business as resilvering mirrors, antique mirrors, but I finally gave that up. While stationed in New Mexico, I did rock climbing and cave exploring, mountain stream fishing, hiking, and so on. I immersed myself in Spanish exploration history of the area, a topic that was never taught to us in high school when I was there. We didn't even know about the Spanish influence. I had the pleasure of meeting Sheriff Hick Haynes, who knew Billy the Kid personally, the first sheriff of Otero County after the range wars that ended with Billy's death. Through my boss's neighbor, who was Indian commissioner of the area, I met Robert Geronimo, who was grandson of the chief, head of the Mescalero Apache Tribal Council in Cloudcroft. I traveled to Mexico during that time and explored the Aztec ruins there before their restoration, and then drank pina coladas watching the high cliff divers at Acapulco. I have 2 more of those and I would have dived also. I love flying. I've flown a wide range of aircraft, from a single-seat Mooney Mite, which is a kind of airplane you put on rather than climb into, and to every large passenger jet simulator, and flown or rode jump seat on many foreign airlines. I had some very interesting experiences flying on Aeroflot and jump seat and observing their flight practices, which I can entertain you with for another couple hours. I'm a woodworker, though I'm not so active these days. My interests are country furniture reproductions and turned objects. I enjoy cooking from scratch, and I used to be a serious vegetable gardener, but arthritis has taken its toll, and so I'm content with the supermarket.
Seen a lot. You've lived a good, rich life, and in terms of issues around social justice, would you mind sharing what you've learned or what you had to unlearn around issues of social justice?
I regret that perhaps I'm not as active in social justice as I should have been, but I was an observer of many instances of injustice, and it has formed my silent resistance to people behaving badly towards others. Sydney, Ohio in the 30s and 40s was a white community. There were 2 Italian families who operated fruit markets in town, and 3 Greek families who operated 2 confectionaries and ice cream parlors and a delicatessen. There were 4 African American families that I recall, 3 of whom had children in high school with me. There was a scrap metal business owned and operated by a Jewish family, and 2 other Jewish families lived in the community. It was easy, very easy, within the conformity of the culture, especially as a young person, then to make mean jokes about all ethnic groups. My mother was very firm against such disrespect, and she tried to support the black families in several ways with food, clothing, and referrals for catering services, and without being patronizing. At our junior and senior proms, I recall that our Jewish and black friends had to bring their dates from out of town because their local groups weren't large enough to draw from. There was a minor scandal when I was a senior when a white girl classmate asked a popular black athlete to dance with her. My parents were very tolerant and taught all three of us children to be so by word and example. There was another, I'm sorry going on here, but this is a kind of an interesting point. World War II was a change agent in a lot of this. Every black family had someone in the service. One of them from our community was Huck Brown, who was a very popular football player and won many games for our high school, and feted at the local after-game restaurant by the local civic leaders and his peers who spared no opportunity to pat him on the back and tell him what a great guy he was. He joined the Army and won a battlefield commission in Europe before returning to Sydney, discharged as a captain rank. He wrote a very poignant letter to our local newspaper later, describing the treatment he received. He said that all during combat, he kept alive the dream of returning to his hometown where he felt wanted and needed and had close friends. The reality was that when he came home and applied for work, few would grant him an interview, and the largest employer offered him a janitor job. He was married with an infant child. Finally, the local dry cleaner, friends of ours, hired him so that he'd have some level of income, but he fell to drinking and died a few years later, a broken man. It was so sad. At ACA Cleveland, one of our fellow engineers, a black man, Lively Bryant was his name, was a popular and very competent wind tunnel engineer researcher. He was a member of our intramural softball team, and one evening after practice, the team prepared to depart for a local bar for a drink and snacks, and invited Lively to join in. And I'll never forget his answer, which was to the effect that, "You guys go ahead and have fun. Me, I've got to drive all the way to my home in the east side of Cleveland, in the ghetto area where my mom is waiting for me to help her with dinner and to make sure the house is locked against robberies. And then next morning, I'll drive back over here again to be able to forget for a while, the neighborhood where I live." It was a transformative moment for many of us who heard that, who never considered what Lively's home life was like. I witnessed many other social injustices over the years at the individual level. I've seen some terrible class-based treatments while in foreign countries where the victim was so humiliated. Some improvements in this country have taken hold, but we have so far to go yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack. Can we give Jack a... And if it's okay by you, we'll just take a few questions. I'm sure people have questions.
Tim, I might ask you to help me with this.
Okay.
I know, but this is one.
Sorry, technology always wants me.
Fresh battery always helps. Who was first?
Your active duty military service, exactly what years? And the second part of that question is, have you done your Veterans History for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project?
Oh, can you repeat, Nancy?
Repeat it.
What years were you on active duty and,
What years?
yeah,
Oh, 1954 to 1958.
and have you done your Veterans History for the Library of Congress? Your Veterans History?
No, I have not contributed to that.
There's a link.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Any other?
Kwame?
Yeah, thank you so much for the rendition. I note that you've gone through theoretical science, you've gone through practical science, application science at the highest level. You have flown all kinds of places, seen all kinds of ranges. You've done what topmost scientists do. Was there any point in your life when you were doing all these things that you doubted the existence of God because of the knowledge that you have acquired?
Yes, how do I reconcile science with recognition of God and my faith? I have no problem. I think I progressed from childhood, what I call myths of what heaven and God were like, and as I learned more about science, why some of these things had to fall by the wayside. But it never diminished my feeling that there was an all supreme creator, and that all one has to do, in my view, is look at the glorious universe, which we're just a tiny little blue bubble, to realize that there is some greater force that is looking over us and determining our future, not necessarily on an individual basis, but to shape an environment in which we all can practice our faith. So, if anything, science has strengthened my beliefs.
Jack, I want to make a couple of observations. Sitting here listening to you talk, it really does my heart well, because in a sense, I almost feel like you're family because of similarities of our backgrounds and experiences that we've had. And it just pleases me to know and to know someone like you that have had these kinds of experiences. I think it's wonderful. I'm very happy that you've come forth and shared this with us, because again, I think, don't want to sound trite, it sounds to me like you're what we used to call a Renaissance man. And we still do. So thanks for sharing. I personally enjoyed it, and I feel a deeper kinship to you now than ever before.
Thank you.
Just a minute. Unless you want me to run. Do you want me to run?
Jack, it's a fantastic career actually. And having met folk like Neil Armstrong and the numerous astronauts and that, did you find that did you ever sort of consult with them afterwards and find how their experiences out in space, looking back on our blue planet, whether that affected, were they men of religious sort of beliefs and so forth? Folk you knew.
The other astronauts, you mean? Or,
Yes.
I think there's a mixed bag there. I think some of the astronauts had deep personal psychological experiences, and there was one of them went off to one of these retreats and became a kind of a holy man. Others were more pragmatic in their beliefs. I think I wouldn't attempt to answer for them individually, but I think on the whole, they were very much awed by the sight of the cosmos from orbit and the lunar missions.
Jack, I found your life story so very interesting, but I just wanted to let you know that fortunately for the last 32 years I was privileged to make all the eyeglasses for John Glenn. And we became friends with he and his wife, and he frequently spoke of, when he was in space, of his religion. He never lost faith. He said his prayers every day, blessed our country, and he just never lost his religion. So I just wanted to let you know that I was very privileged also. Thank you.
Not all.
She said that she made eyeglasses for years when he was for John Glenn.
Yeah.
And he never lost his faith.
Yeah, right, yeah. No, I think that's true, yeah. I'm sorry, I apologize for my hearing loss. It's difficult for me to hear. No, I can't imagine anyone that would have immersed themselves in this space operational program that wouldn't come back with very, very deep beliefs in some power that may be different from what our traditional viewpoints are, but it's nevertheless it's a belief in a stronger power than I apologize for going on so long.
No, that's great.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much again, Jack.